excited to produce this with Meryl and Alex. And finally, we want to tell you about Little Steven's Roadshow. This is a show that Stevie Van Zandt and guests in a dynamic exchange to support Teach Rock's free curriculum. Just go to teachrock.org/roadshow, and that's this Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Guests include Kanya Das, Kid Leo, Michael Stanley, and Neil Giraldo. Neil Giraldo, many of you will know, is longtime collaborator of Chrissie Hynde, and he wrote, among other songs, Jesse's Girl, one of my favorite songs. So check that out. Go to teachrock.org/roadshow. And now we're about to bring on Josh Friedman. And we want to thank Josh for being here. Our episode is about positivity. So tonight you're going to meet Professor Friedman. Last Sunday, every Sunday we do this, last Sunday we met the Krybecks, Dr. Arthi Krybek and Dr. Tom Krybek. Tom is a neurologist and Dr. Arthi was running for Congress. Tuesday was her primary election. She lost to incumbent in the Democratic primary who voted with Donald Trump 200 times and had the most consistent voting record with Donald Trump. That tells you something about the power of incumbency in American politics. And before that, the previous Sunday, we were with Will Sutton, who is a New Orleans-based columnist at The Advocate, NOLA News, and past president of the National Association of Black Journalists. But tonight, you're going to meet Josh Friedman, and here he is. Say hello, everyone, to Josh. Hi, Josh.
Hello. Hi, Sree.
How are you? Nice to see you. How are you?
I'm here in the wilds of upstate New York. I'm great, actually. I'm completely isolated with my wife. My daughter and her two daughters live down the road, just a walk away. And we've decided to allow us to be in touch with them, which is fabulous. They're 6 and 4. And I walk around in the woods a lot. And unfortunately, that's about it, really, because we're stuck.
You are stuck. We should say that because you're in a rural area of upstate New York, the Wi-Fi isn't necessarily as good as you would like. So video may be a little quiet, but the audio is great, and that's what matters.
Good.
Really. We want to hear you.
Good.
So let's start by telling us how the pandemic has been. Where were you when you realized that this is going to be a lockdown for the long haul? You're someone who's very familiar with international affairs. You travel a lot. You're on the road. Talk about that a little bit first, please.
Actually, when I read about it happening in China in January, I guess, I kind of panicked because it seemed like if it was going to happen in China, it was going to happen here. So I was an early panicker. And everything, unfortunately, came to fruition. And we have a program at the Carey Institute called the Logan Nonfiction Program. And we had to close it down. You know, we have about a dozen or so writers and documentarians in residence. We had to close it down early. And I was one of the hawks arguing that we should close it down quickly. And unfortunately, it's still closed down. So that's where I was. I was here. The Institute is only a couple of miles away. And in this little village where we live, it's called Rensselaerville.
And how did you know that when you saw it in China that it was going to come here or was going to be as bad as you suspected it was going to be?
I think it's based on having been a journalist for a long time. You know, I kind of put 2 and 2 together. And knowing the leadership of the United States at the moment, didn't seem to me that we were going to be particularly skilled in dealing with it. And it just made sense based on SARS and MERS and all the other past viruses that it was just a matter of time. I didn't see how they could keep it from coming here. It wasn't any particular deep scientific knowledge that I have. But I guess I've seen enough really lousy things during my career that I'm not that much of an optimist all the time. So it just made sense. It was a gut feeling. And as you know, since you were my student, and you've now exceeded by far anything I could tell you, but as you may recall, I always said, trust your gut. And I had an instinctive gut feeling. My stomach hurt that things were going to degrade.
Well, I wish your gut wasn't so correct, and here we are now, all of us suffering. So maybe we can try to blame you. Trump is trying to blame everybody, so we can blame you. Yeah. So on a serious note, we should point out that 136,000 people have died in the U.S., and the president continues to, at best, ignore, at worst, sow misinformation and disinformation into everything that's happening. He wore a mask yesterday as if that was a big gesture, but that was compared to what he had been doing. It was a good thing that he wore it. But as you know, his staff had to contrive and make up an event at which he could plausibly wear a mask. And that's why he went to Walter Reed Hospital. Just a really sad state of affairs. How do you judge the United States on its performance versus other countries? There was, at this morning, we talked about how the president's trying to open up all the schools. And he says, look at Scandinavia, they're opening the schools, so why can't we? Some of the countries that he pointed to had 10 and 11 new cases. We had 57,000 new cases the same day that he was pointing to them. So give us your take and take your time to give us kind of a sense of where you see America and its leadership at this time.
I think probably the best thing would be to study the career of Caligula, the emperor of Rome, who, as we now know, was a nut. He was a paranoid nut. And if you recall the I, Claudius series on public television, at one point he was talking to Claudius, and he said, I feel very funny. I think I'm turning into a god. I feel very strange. And I think that's where we are now. We have a strange man who, had he not been born with a lot of money, might have wound up in jail, in charge of a very powerful government. And he's a cunning man. He's used his power to get rid of anyone who defies him intellectually. He's surrounded by a bunch of very weak yes people. And he spends most of his time in his bedroom, I think, or in his upstairs suite.
Executive
fantasies about slights, insults, people plotting against him. And I think he spends a lot of time rehearsing in his mind how he will deal with that. He sort of talks to himself about it. And he's smart. He comes up with clever lines, like Sleepy Joe or Crooked Hillary, or he rehearses that a lot. That's really where he spends most of his energy. I don't think he really understands how the government works or what the history of the United States is about. I really doubt if he's read the Constitution. If you read the Constitution, it's very clear. I read it every year. It's mostly about how to prevent someone becoming a king. And he's trying to become a king. Luckily, and I must say, I don't really feel like a religious person. In fact, I'm not a religious person. I'm very skeptical about religion. But you have to say, it gives me pause to see that some kind of divine intervention may have been responsible for first the virus, then when that wasn't enough, the upheaval, the social upheaval that we've had, Black Lives Matter and other, and it knocked him off his perch. And, he's hopefully going to be incapable of climbing back up there, and hopefully we'll see the last of him after November. And it's going to be a very difficult job to rebuild. After World War II, we created a Pax Americana in the world. FDR had some visionary ideas. He wasn't around to put it into effect, but he put his people in, and they knew what he wanted, the United Nations. There were all sorts of financial arrangements, Bretton Woods, others. The world became a much more interlocked place with checks and balances. And that plus the terrible trauma that the Europeans and Asians suffered in World War II because of the Nazis and the Japanese Imperial Army, people had very little taste for armed conflict. But slowly, or fanaticism. Slowly that seems to be receding in the past. People are forgetting. And it took a person like Trump, who himself is kind of a warmonger, really, although he's such a coward that he's afraid to pull the trigger at the end. But he's trying to dismantle all of the checks and balances, all of the institutional relationships that we have set up among countries in the world. And if he were to win a second term, we'd be back the way it was before World War I. I remember I knew a U.S. diplomat during the Balkan Wars who worked on the Security Council. And, the Security Council and Western Europe were spinning their wheels trying to figure out how to deal with this destabilizing war of aggression by the Serbians. And he said, if we're not careful, we're going to start World War I. And that's basically where we're at now. Nationalism, prejudice, hatred, racism, all the old games. But I am optimistic, and I can share with you that my instinct is that Trump will have to leave in November. And we're in for a slog.
So you're already looking past Trump, but I've been telling people not to do that, because even though all the polling and everything might look like there's a good chance that he won't win, I think that presuming that he is going to lose is trouble. And even today, he has 40% of the country. He has 90% of the Republican Party. And as I hear things like, Texas is in play, and that reminds me of Hillary Clinton being told Arizona is in play. It may be in play this year, but in 2016. So I'm not as positive as you, and that's why you're on the positivity show.
That's a generational thing. My daughter, who's about your age, also is very, very worried. I think if you examine the granular part of all of these polls, a lot of people who supported Trump previously are not supporting him. So it gives me a little more heart, but everyone has to register, everyone has to vote, and we have to fight like hell to make sure that Biden wins. I agree with you.
So let me ask you a question. I decided that I'm not a daily journalist anymore after the 2016 election. I'm a professor. I do opinion journalism and commentary. So I could, in fact, talk and say what I wanted and point out the problems of this administration. I felt very comfortable with that. The Josh Friedman who grew up as a journalist, what would he say about the way you and I are talking right now at a time when that was not the way, especially both of us were trained at Columbia Journalism School?
Well, I'm not, I'm retired. I'm not, they took the shackles off when I retired. So I feel liberated. I'm still indoctrinated with the idea of people working as journalists and trying to be as objective as possible. I know that's a very demeaned concept these days. But, I do think journalists have to understand their biases and overcome them if possible, and reveal any conflicts they have, and strive to present the whole picture. That doesn't mean, if you were covering the Nazis, you shouldn't, during World War II, it doesn't mean you had to call up Hitler and get a comment. You didn't put in your article, Mr. Hitler could not be reached for comment. There's evil is evil. But I haven't given up. The problem is that all of that system was enforced by editors. And we don't have editors anymore. So I think it's sort of dissolving. And given the whole marketplace is changing, and I think people in your generation and younger, much younger than you, are feeling much more liberated to express their opinions in what they write or video they take or whatever. Even if they write a so-called objective story, they can rush to Twitter and give their own opinion. So it's changing.
It is changing, and that's what's interesting. So I have a newsletter which comes out every Sunday, and today we talked about how COVID-19 is disrupting education in America in ways we never imagined. And then I wrote last week why 40% of Americans continue to approve of President Trump. And
I'd like to read that.
Yeah, so so everybody who, if you didn't get this in your inbox, I hope you will subscribe. The address is right here on the screen, sreenet.substack.com, sreenet.substack.com. And in it, I've taken to writing what I believe is the truth. We're pro-facts, pro-truth, pro-science, but that can be interpreted as anti-Trump. That's the world we're in now. And people have called me out on it a little bit. And that's what's kind of interesting about that you can just being pro-truth or pro-facts or pro-science makes you anti-Trump, and that's held against some people, as we have seen. But
that's what he pitches. I mean, that's his guiding principle. But I want to go back to the 40%. I think you have to look more closely at it. I think of the 40%, about a quarter or 10% don't understand the question. So you can disregard them. They're just completely out of it. Then another 5% probably don't even understand how the system works. I remember when I was canvassing, and this will date me, for Jack Kennedy, door to door, I was shocked by the number of people who didn't know who the president of the United States was. This was in New Jersey. So I don't know about that 40%. I think obviously we can say that probably about 30% of the people in the United States, or maybe 25%, are either paranoid or kind of dumb. And that's basically his supporters. I think basically brighter people, more objective people, have become disenchanted. As far as the truth, what you're saying about facts, I mean, that's obvious, but you may be tainted by your earlier education. I think there's been a tremendous increase in skepticism by readers or viewers about the veracity of what they're reading or watching. We don't know, it could be the Russians have spread all sorts of disinformation to try to make people lose faith. Certainly the Republican Party, in order to change what had been a minority into a majority coalition, has tried to destroy the credibility of the media. And Trump's taken that even further. So I'm not surprised that you get challenged, because people don't believe the truth anymore. They don't believe there is a truth, many people.
And that is so sad. One of the things we do on the show, Josh, is we take comments from people all over the world. So as I name the places they're watching, I want to hear your reactions, any memories you have of the places, or if you've heard of the places, or if you've been there, tell us. And we'll do this tour right now. So we're going to start Anand Babu. Sorry?
Never mind.
I didn't hear you. Sorry.
That's okay.
All right.
I said I won't use the word shithole.
Okay, that's right. Yes, we won't say that. That's what the president says. He also says enemies of the people.
I happen to like shithole countries.
Yeah. You've been to a lot of countries. Okay, Anand Babu says, hello from India. You've been.
India, you know, Sree, I've never been to India. I really feel it's one of the real lacks in my experience. I've been all around India.
Yeah.
I've never been there. I would love to go to India. And
your classmate at Columbia Journalism School was one of India's leading journalists, N. Ram. And
Ram, I admire very much. He's invited me to come as his guest. And we were classmates at Columbia.
Yeah.
It's, you know, it's sort of like, I feel it must be like what I felt when I went to China. It's like stepping into another world, another dimension. You know, it's so many different cultural values and customs and attitudes that I'm not familiar with, and on such a large scale. It's an alternative universe almost. That's the way it seems to me. I really would like to make sure I go there before the end. That's a lack. That's a minus for me. I admire India, although I'm very upset with what's happening there. I don't understand it. It's just, you know, when I grew up, India was the model of humane behavior. Gandhi, Nehru, you know, we looked at it as a pacifist nation, a humble nation in terms of not wanting to be an imperialist country, even though it was very big. We admired it. Now I'm afraid that it's sort of like what's happened in the U.S. It's been taken over by a bunch of small-minded haters. I don't understand it.
Wow, that's small-minded haters is what's happened in the U.S. for sure.
Yeah.
And that,
you're going to agree with me or not?
No, so India, I think, is suffering through many of the same instincts that are plaguing America: the rise of the right, the attacks on the press, the suppression of minorities. All of that's happening in India as well, and we're seeing that the rise of the strong man, the rise of kind of conservative thought. They're all different flavors of conservatism, but right wing, hardline.
It's the religious zealotry that really bothers me.
Yeah, and that's the problem.
It's just disgusting. Yeah. It's just terrible. And another thing I don't understand is why so many Indians in the United States, and I think I've seen that they're the most highly educated ethnic group in the United States. Why so many support Modi? I don't get that.
No, many of them also support Trump, and so that's a deadly.
40%. We know they're dumb.
No, so the Trump Modi connection and the Indian Americans support them. It's a fascinating study. My dad wrote a book about Modi's foreign policy, and in it, the cover is Trump and Modi holding hands as they walked through Houston together. You may remember that.
I'd like to look at that book.
Yeah, it's called Modi Policy. That's the
people like your father must be very disillusioned. I mean, they fought to build a better India than is now. It's terrible.
So this is the title of this. Let me just show you the book jacket here. So it's written in through the Shakespearean prism. So it's Mo Diplomacy through a Shakespearean prism. And here they are, Mr. Modi and Mr. Trump together, holding hands.
Yeah. Can I get it on Amazon?
I believe so. You can certainly look. There's one left, so you can try to get that after.
Is that $1 or is that a rupee? What is
that's
that?
In rupees. Yeah, that's in rupees. That's Amazon India. Yeah, it's not $655 yet. It will be one day. Let's keep going. let's keep going. Paula Kiger is watching from Tallahassee, Florida. And Paula is one of the producers of our New York Times read along, where we read the New York Times out loud on Facebook. And we are doing that again next Sunday. Please join us when our guest host, Neil Parekh, will be hosting the show. And our guest will be Claire Smith, first woman inducted into baseball's Hall of Fame Writers Wing, and former New York Times columnist and current ESPN news editor. And Neil Parekh, who's our executive producer, will be guest hosting as I take a Sunday morning break for a change. So everybody, please tune in next Sunday for that, and find all my archives on our website on YouTube, youtube.com/SreeNet. So please check that out. Let's keep going. Have you been to Tallahassee?
No, but I've been in Florida.
Of course you have, yeah.
But Tallahassee's up north, you know. When I go there, I go to a warm place in the winter, so if I can.
Jonathan said, hello from East Village. We just lost Odessa, a beloved neighborhood restaurant.
What happened to it?
I must have, they must have shut it down. They must have shut. They must not have survived the pandemic.
Yeah.
So what are your memories of the Village? You used to work for the Village Voice, so let's tell people about that.
I actually I wrote for the Voice, but I ran a competitor called the Soho News. Soho Weekly News.
Right.
Was a competitor of the Voice. East Village was in our readership area. You know, it changed radically, and then it kind of went into, first it became degenerated, became kind of lousy with drugs and stuff. And then I think it's probably being gentrified now. I don't know. But, when Sree, I don't know if you came on one of these, when I came back to Columbia and I was working with the international students, and let me interrupt for 1 minute to say that the international student par excellence that I had in my career was Sree Sreenivasan. He was in the first year that I was teaching, I had no idea how to teach. Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism, like the rest of Columbia, is not the best managed institution in the world. I was hired on 2 weeks' notice to be the international division head. Luckily, Sree, so we had a class called New York is a Foreign Country. I think.
New York as a foreign country.
That's there, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And all the international students would get together, and they were all there. Sree was there as a young hirsute man. And we'd have the class, and then afterwards he'd sort of linger, and he'd come over and very nicely say, why don't you do it this way? Can I suggest you try that? And, he had great ideas, and I absorbed. And he got me started on my teaching career. And then I got him started on his career, which has been very stellar. So the question is, what? I forgot. I interrupted myself.
Okay, we're going to keep moving. If we stop, we'll go off the rails here. But I should point out that many years later, I was, of course, Josh's colleague as a professor at Columbia. I was there for 20 years. And at one point, by the vagaries of the management system, poor Josh had to report to me. And he took it very well in stride. And he was not the best at all the bureaucracy of it, but he was a wonderful, inspiring teacher, and someone who gave everybody who he met a reason to smile and learn about journalism and care about journalism, and I've never forgotten that. But it was quite the adventure.
I was not a good bureaucrat, and I think that used to drive you nuts because I had to fill out all this stuff that you had to then pass along. I never did it. A lot of paperwork.
Yes, that's right. That's right. Journalists like paperwork.
So
let's keep going. Let's go to Long Island. So you worked for Newsday. So talk a little bit about Long Island.
Well, I worked for Newsday. Newsday was very, very good to me. It was one of the richest newspapers in the United States when I worked for it. An outlet from Dave Levin's called Pulitzer. It was owned by the Los Angeles Times.
We seem to have lost Josh. Sometimes that happens. As you saw, his connection wasn't very strong. He's in a rural part of upstate New York, so hopefully he'll come back in a couple of minutes or soon. But you're watching my conversation with Josh Friedman, my former professor, Pulitzer Prize winner, and the vice chair of the Carey Center for Global Good. And we're going to hear all about it when he comes back in just a couple of minutes. Please share this with your friends and family around the world. This is our Sunday night positivity show. The idea is that even in the midst of everything, there is reason and opportunity to be a little positive. And that's what we're trying to do on this show. So please share this with your friends and family. We would love to get your comments and your thoughts about where things are. I'll point out a couple of things while we wait for Josh to join us. One of the things that we have learned is that New York's officials reported 0 coronavirus cases for the first time since March 11th, when the first death happened. And here at Jody Cantor, first thing every morning I check New York City's numbers and pray for this extraordinary progress to continue. This is where we all the way down to 0. And we just hope that that can be the case in the rest of the United States. But we are so, sorry, I was trying to show you that, but I didn't. 1 second. This is the chart from Jody Cantor. First thing every morning I check New York City's numbers and pray for the extraordinary progress to continue. And that's one of the ways in which we kind of think about the crisis and the virus. While we're waiting for Josh to come back, let me play an ad from one of our sister programs, She's on Call, which is a great medical show that we now run every Sunday. So here's the ad from She's on.
Hi, I'm Dr. Sujana Chandrasekhar. I'm an ear, nose, and throat surgeon in New York City and New Jersey.
And I'm Dr. Marina Kurian. I'm a general surgeon in New York City area.
We'd like to introduce you to our new show, She's on Call. We air live on social media platforms from 11 a.m. to noon every Sunday Eastern Time. We discuss the medical topics of the week.
We have 2 great guests, experts in their field, that help us analyze and look at some of the topical issues of healthcare. And we are on 11 to 12, so please join us.
We'd love to answer your questions, so please share and watch and send us your questions and comments.
See you Sundays at 11.
Thanks, folks. I hope you found that interesting, and I hope you will please make sure you check out She's on Call on Facebook and on Twitter. We're waiting for Josh Friedman to join us again. This is what happens with the vagaries of internet access. He's in a rural part of New York, and he'll be, I hope, joining us soon. He is supposed to come back on unless the internet's completely dropped out, and that's kind of the fun and pain of doing live shows like this. As you all know, let's check out the comments as people come in as people talk here. Rehan has put in a link to my father's book, T.P. Srinivasan's book, Mo Diplomacy Through a Shakespearean Prism. And let's go back here and look at who all are watching and who's here. Mark says hello from Durham, North Carolina. Hi, Mark. Great to always have you here. Steve's watching from Philadelphia. Steve's part of our awesome New York Times read-along crew that we mentioned already. And Rick says Josh's gut was informed by scientific understanding, and that, of course, is important as you think about where and when we understand the problems of international affairs. And Steve says, I need to reread the Constitution. Thank you for the reminder. Josh Friedman reads the Constitution every year, rereads it. How many of you do that? I think that would be something that we should all be doing. And Rick Botello says, the Lincoln Project must go beyond anti-Trumpism to focus on the positivity of true heroic patriotism and unrig the deep state of fake patriotism. And that's certainly one of the things that we're seeing. For those of you not familiar with it, the Lincoln Project aims to bring attention to the problems of the Trump administration. And these are conservatives and Republicans who have come back to talk publicly about the problems with Mr. Trump and his policies. And that's what's called the Lincoln Project. Some of you saw that President Trump every few days kind of rediscovers that Lincoln was a Republican, and he will say things like, most people didn't know that. Nobody knew that. People didn't know that. Everybody knows that Lincoln was a Republican, except Donald Trump, someone who knows nothing about American history. And Ashok says the education crisis in the U.S. is a major concern, with foreign students asked to leave the country in the near future. How will that decision have an impact now? This is something that we're definitely tracking very closely, and we're going to have an episode on this topic very soon. And we were waiting to kind of get some more clarity. You saw that MIT and Harvard have sued the president and the administration about this policy that says you have to reopen by saying you can't take classes online. You have to be in a situation where you have in-person classes, and that is just outrageous. And to use students and their safety as pawns in this effort to reopen the economy, really problematic. Ying says, hi, Josh. Ying from Hong Kong is watching. Love your optimism. And I'm hoping that Josh will be with us in any minute. I'm going to ask him to come back into that link. And thank you, folks, for watching. While you're waiting, let me remind you of a show that we have coming up that you won't want to miss. And this is a show that is coming up on Thursday, Little Steven's Roadshow. And you will really enjoy it. This is Little Steven. You know him from the E Street Band, and you know him from The Sopranos, and you also know him from Lilyhammer, one of my favorite Netflix shows. In fact, the first of the Netflix originals. It is now, of course, so many more folks are in so many thousands of more Netflix originals, but that was the very first Netflix original. So please go to teachrock.org/roadshow, and that's this Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern time. And guests include Kanya Das, Kid Leo, Michael Stanley, and Neil Giraldo will be speaking with Little Steven, and that's Stevie Van Zandt. So please do check this out. It's coming up this this Thursday. Josh tells me that he is trying and will do his best to join us. I'm going to tell him that he can also join by joining us from his phone. But let's see. There he is. I hear him, and here he is. Josh, I see you. Check this out. It's coming up this Thursday. Josh tells me that he is trying.
You see me?
And I see you, Josh. I see you. Turn off your phone or whatever else you have on there.
What?
Hold on.
I hear you talking.
There you go.
There we go.
You're hearing me on something. Okay, good. Now, let's keep adjusting there, and you're back. This is the fun of live television, and you're looking better than ever.
Yes. All right, how's that?
Perfect. Thank you.
Where were we? I forget.
It's okay. Can you just adjust the headset a little? Just a little more. Yeah, I don't want to cut off your chin there. Okay, there you go. Nice.
Okay.
That's good. Okay, that's good. That's good. Don't touch it. Okay. Thank you for coming back. I didn't know if you had left me forever. Ying Chan says, hello, Josh. Ying from Hong Kong.
Love your Ying. I miss you. I haven't seen Ying since we went to Burma together. That's the correct way to say it, Burma. And
why do you say that and not Myanmar? I spent time as a child when it was Burma. I call it Burma. Why do you call it Myanmar? Why do you not call it Myanmar?
Myanmar connotes that the dominant ethnic group is the dominant ethnic group and runs it. Burma is a much more politically neutral way to say it.
But
You
it
know,
is the name of the country. What can you do about it? Just because authoritarians are in charge.
no, the thing is, it's true. I mean, I don't recommend following the Articles of Confederation. You know, we have the Constitution. It was now that Aung San Suu Kyi is in power, I guess we can stop calling it Burma because she goes along with the program. But I think they were encouraging the use of Burma. There are many ethnic groups in Burma, Myanmar, and the non-dominant ones are treated very badly. I mean, the Rohingya are famous, but there are other groups that are also treated badly. It's not a good situation. I think there's unfortunately, there's an acceptance among the dominant group of kind of racism towards the other ethnicities. It's kind of the way we treat Native Americans here. It's not a good situation.
I hear you, and that's something we have to pay close attention to. Also, the
Sree
role.
and I were there together.
Yeah,
We were trying to. Soros sent us. We were supposed to. There was a huge phalanx of teachers from Columbia and other places, and we were supposed to help upgrade the higher education system. And we went to see the way they were teaching journalism in the official university. It was sad. Most of the teachers were geographers. They didn't know what journalism was, but Ying was very resourceful, and whatever we could do, we did.
Folks, if you're just joining us, I'm in conversation with Josh Friedman, a Pulitzer Prize-winning international journalist, and he is also an early chair of the Committee to Protect Journalists, which we'll talk about. We'll also talk about the Carey Center for Global Good, and this is our positivity show, so that's got to be the most positive title of them all. Tell us about the Carey Center for Global Good.
You know, things happen accidentally in life, right? So after I retired from the journalism school, because my wife was working up here as the State Parks Commissioner, New York State Parks Commissioner, and I figured I'm retired, you know. And in our little village was an institute, which ran into financial trouble, and a very wealthy guy, a billionaire with a B as a boy, he came on weekends, Bill Carey. He made a fortune in real estate. And he was a Republican, but he called himself a Bloomberg Republican. And my wife and I and some others talked him into buying this institute. And he came up with the name. And he said, I'll buy it if Carol, my wife, runs it, since none of the rest of us know how to run anything. But it's a very small village, just a few hundred people. It's a beautiful place. It looks like a small college. We can put up close to 100 people. We have 100 acres. We have a beautiful theater, restaurant, very nice place. Shortly after all of this happened, and as we were preparing to take over at the Institute, Bill died. He dropped dead at lunch in Palm Beach. Fitting way to go. And we were stuck. But anyway, we created 2 or 3 programs, which until the COVID-19 were doing quite well. One is the Logan nonfiction program, which I mentioned earlier, which has, we've had over 150 people. They do nonfiction books, documentaries, photo essays or photo books, any medium really. It's just based on the essential is that the applicant is doing a lot of reporting of fact, which is what you like, Sree. The purpose of the thing is to bring well-reported, well-substantiated facts to the attention of the public. And we've had some great books. The other program we have is a program which is still going because it's more virtual and digital than person, helping teaching ordinary people to be teachers of refugees. And that's both in the US and in refugee camps in places like Syria, Jordan, where the demand was so great that the pool of teachers ran out and parents and others just sort of jumped into the fray and attempted to fill the gap. And so our program gives them mini courses in pedagogy and gives certificates and so on, because people in many countries like to have a plaque on the wall saying they're an official such and such. And hopefully we're upgrading the level of education, because as we know from places like Gaza and other places, when the education system collapses, a whole generation becomes lost. And in fact, we're skirting that now in the United States. We work with local farmers. We help them. We've responded to the brewery industry, which is growing locally because of tax changes that the Cuomo administration made. We're helping farmers pair up with brewers and grow the right kind of hops and products in New York State that entitle the brewers to get a tax exemption. We do community stuff. To make money, we have weddings. It's a beautiful place for that. And we have NGOs who meet there. It's a good place for retreats and so on. But we're dead in the water now because the Cuomo administration rightly does not allow any gathering more than 10 people. And our whole raison d'etre is gathering people together at our institute. So the nonfiction program is in a hiatus, and I don't know what's going to happen. There's one of the groups now. Yeah, there's some of our fellows. We give them. There's some brewers and farmers. They're growing hops or something that I couldn't see. Barley, maybe. This is a very rural area where we are. It's up in the mountains. It's sort of almost like Appalachia.
How far away from New York City is it?
The drive is about 2.5 to 3 hours.
And what is the nearest big town?
Rensselaerville. It looks like a little Norman Rockwell village.
And what is the nearest big town?
Albany.
Okay.
We got a large collection of writers, artists, photographers in the town because, for those people who are seeking country living, Columbia County across the Hudson from us is quite fashionable. But Albany County, where we are, is not fashionable. And so the real estate prices are much lower for beautiful farms and houses. But a lot of people are like lemmings, they only want to go where all the other fancy people go. But so it's reasonably priced for creative people. So we have a great number of artists and other creative people here. It's a lovely little place. And we've been coming here since the 70s. We know everybody, we're sort of like almost natives. It takes a couple of generations to become a native. I knew that from where I grew up. But we're sort of we're pseudo natives. We're accepted by the native to some degree.
Let's see some of the other comments coming in. My mom's watching from Kerala, India. Love you, Amma. Great to see you.
Mrs. Srenivasan, how are you? You produced a good son there. Congratulations.
Thank you. A friend.
Did you grow up in Kerala, Sree? I didn't realize that. I thought you came from Delhi.
No, I came to the Columbia from Delhi, where I was a journalist in 1993. But my parents live in Kerala. We're from Kerala.
That's where your family is from.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
it's a nice place, I hear.
Yes, it is. God's own country, we call it. Mark says a friend of mine said
in India, right?
Yeah. Mark says a friend of mine said they thought 30% can make their mortgage, but then they also had heard figures actually 70%. Which figure do you think is right? He's talking about the economic crisis. How bad do you think it is? And are you seeing some of the reasons why people in rural America tend to be more conservative or more going along?
Let me tell you that, I kind of suspected Trump was going to win during the campaign. I had a lot of friends of mine in New York who thought I was crazy. But as I say, we're up here in Appalachia, as it were. And I know I have friends, who live here all for generations. The people had farms till the Depression, and then they got other jobs because the farming economy collapsed unless you have a large farm. And this is not the most, we have long winters. It's not the best place to grow stuff. The soil all washed down to the Hudson Valley. We're on the lip of the Hudson Valley. So most farmers that still were farmers did it in part-time. They would drive a school bus or they would get a job at a local factory or whatever. Over the last 20 or 30 years, Albany, which had an industrial base, was carved out. Everything that was producing income for them dried up, and now the local schools are closed. They're not having any school buses, which, if surprisingly is a large a large source of income for people in the countryside. The state is broke. A lot of state employees are being laid off. So this compounded what existed even before Trump ran. People were desperate. Their kids could not get educations. They couldn't, the kids were taking drugs, a lot of opioids. The kids couldn't get jobs that matched what level the parents had. They were lost. It was a lost generation. It was terrible. I mean, it was really, kids were going to jail. It was terrible. So I think that's why Trump won. Trump responded to this by saying, and the people felt, by the way, very disrespected by people from places like New York City because they didn't have college educations and so on. Trump said, look, I like you. I like the uneducated. They're my people. And you're the best. It's a sales technique. Salesmen, the first step you do is you sort of make the client or the customer feel good about themselves. You tell them they have a nice house if you're visiting their house. Tell them they have a nice car, nice children, whatever. That's what Trump does. You're great. You're a real American. You're the salt of the earth. All those other people are terrible people. They're not real Americans. You're the backbone. He flatters them. And so they voted for him. I don't know if they're going to vote for him now because their economic situation is so bad. And as the questioner Mark was saying, people are defaulting on their mortgages. I think for the moment, there are certain forgiveness programs so that they can postpone paying. Some of them forgive the money completely. Others require it to be paid later. But, a lot of these people were having two earner households. They're down to one earner or no earner. Healthcare is terrible. They don't have insurance. They were getting insurance through their employer. I like the Depression. It's very scary. And that does offer a climate that welcomes the kind of crap that Trump peddles, racism and nationalism and so on. But I don't see, this is an interesting indicator. And when Trump ran against Hillary, this place was plastered with Trump signs all over the place, except our little village where we had a lot of Hillary signs and Bernie signs, actually more Bernies. I don't see very many Trump signs anymore. It's interesting. I think people are sort of, they may not like Biden, they don't like the Democrats, but I think they've lost some faith in Trump. He really bungled the disease. We don't have very much COVID, by the way. I don't know of any, I don't think, there was a rumor of one case in Rensselaerville, but I don't know if it happened. And now that Cuomo has done his thing, COVID is really not that scary. We do have a problem with some wise guys who don't want to wear masks. It's become a mark of virility.
Only in this country is it like that. Well, the other country, we did a show yesterday about Brazil. And Brazil also, they have what's called the tropical Trump. And in some ways worse. It's hard to imagine someone who is more racist and more misogynist and more homophobic, but he is. Yeah. Let's keep reading these comments. And let's see here. Margaret Di Piazza says, don't believe the 40%. Definitely maybe 10% are for Trump. Any scientist has to be not for Trump. I don't think there are that many scientists in this country. And Josh, can we adjust your chin, please, again? Can you just sit up? Yeah, there you go. There you go. You got it. I think it's so overwhelming and confusing with mixture of info. Trump is a sick man. I personally believe people do believe in the truth. I'm in New York City.
Well, Margaret, the problem is in New York City, you are reinforced by other people who agree with you. That's not the case up here necessarily. And people's access to the news and to information is mostly outside of our little village. It's Fox, it's Sinclair. Sinclair, which is an evil place, owns one of the 3 local stations, the CBS affiliate. Here is owned by Sinclair. They run a lot of right-wing nonsense. The radio, they listen to the radio. You know, if I say to someone, you ought to listen to NPR, they say, what's that? They never heard of NPR. Most of them have never watched PBS. So it's hard to believe in the truth if you're not getting access to the truth. Even so, I think people have lost faith in Trump because he's a bad manager. You know, he's not handling this disease correctly. He's making a fool of himself with the mask situation. There was a lot of social unrest because of what happened in Minneapolis. The stock market has gone through the floor. So, you know, people are disgruntled if they have a retirement plan, a 401k, and a lot of people weren't that rich have 401ks. Not much in it, but they have them. And people have lost their jobs. So that truth is being manifested. We don't have many scientists up here, though.
Shravan watching from Canada. Tell us about Canada.
I love Canada. You know, during the Vietnam War, we used to go to Canada on a weekend just to sort of breathe some free air. It was, you know, I was when I covered the state government many years ago. It was not it's an easy drive up to Montreal from here, from Albany. I love Canada.
You were in the class of 60.
What?
Sorry, I was going to say you were in the
United States, a sane version of the United States. It's like our cousin or sibling who somehow didn't bang their head on the floor and came out sane.
Talk about the class of 68 at Columbia and what it was like to be here and at the time of the Vietnam War. What was it like to be a young man who could have been drafted? What was the story there? Did you have friends who were drafted? Talk about all of that, please.
Yeah, it was not good. Luckily, I was a little ahead. I still was vulnerable to the draft, but and I had to take the steps that even Trump took till I was 26. That was the magic age. So what I did, and I hated the war. I figured if I go to the Vietnam War, I'm either going to go nuts because I killed people, or I'm going to get killed, and that's even worse. So, you know, it was a very unpalatable alternative. After college, I went into the Peace Corps, which actually affected my life hugely. I don't know if I would have gone in if I didn't have to, I wanted to be a reporter, but I went in. It kept me out of the draft. It was great.
So just to understand, if you went into the Peace Corps, you were exempt from the draft.
You were deferred. You weren't exempt. You were deferred till you got out. And
so you kept trying to do things to get to 26.
Yeah. So once I got out of the Peace Corps, I still had a few years to burn up. I went to graduate school in University of Chicago studying history. I had been in a beautiful country, Costa Rica, in the Peace Corps. Very lucky. There I was in Chicago, the winter. The wind is called the hawk. I'm sitting in the library doing research with all these automatons and everybody's peering into. It was horrible. I mean, then I decided, well, I want to be a journalist. Anyway, I knew that. So Columbia offered a 1-year program, which was great. That was going to bring me to 26. So I applied to Columbia. I transferred to Columbia Journalism School. There, my classmate, Tony Marrow, who later became my boss as the editor of Newsday, said that the class at Columbia is about 50% women and about 50% draft dodgers. It was, so I did make it. I managed to, but during the war was terrible. It was the whole war movement, which started off somewhat idealistically, had become violent toward the end. SDS had split, had become violent, became, people, their bombs were being set. It was, the society was really falling apart. It was very scary. 1968 at Columbia had a little bit of that flavor in the fall, in the spring. The SDS took over the school, essentially. It's hard to tell. There was another faction of Black people who didn't want to have anything to do with the white demonstrators or the white occupiers, because they occupied buildings. For some reason, I don't know who started it, there were rumors that Black people from below Morningside Heights would invade, which was ridiculous. Invade the campus. The school was being run by a very smug kind of Republican, old-style Calvin Coolidge type president, Grayson Kirk. The deans were having nervous breakdowns. The school ground to a halt. Anarchy reigned on the campus. The police came on. They were very resentful of all of these, what they considered rich, spoiled kids who were students at Columbia. They tried to beat the shit out of us, and succeeded often. I was whacked on the top of my head, even though I wasn't an occupier. I had grown up in a community with a lot of leftists, a cooperative community. And I took a jaundiced view of the revolution taking over the United States. I had grown up with this previous generation of people who said that. So what happened at the Columbia Journalism School was we all started being journalists, and we began selling stuff. One person became an occupier. The rest of us were selling news. I had a little, what then was the version of a video camera. It was called forget the name of it. It was like a 16 millimeter small camera. You would wind it like that and take pictures. So I was taking pictures of the police beating professors. I was very excited. I rushed down to CBS, and they put it on all of the national news shows. And at the time, Grayson Kirk, the Coolidge figure, was saying there's no violence on the campus. And of course, this rebutted him. Then the next thing happened. We got out, no graduation to speak of. We had a kind of little thing in a little ceremony at the school. The university did not have a graduation. Then the summer starts, and everybody's going nuts because of the war and the Democratic convention coming up, and all sorts of violences in the wind, which then took place. And the police, in Chicago, were very happy to beat the crap out of all these spoiled kids, which they did. And the politics of the country were so polarized that many people who would have voted for the Democrat, Humphrey, were voting as if they were current members of the Green Party or diehard Bernie supporters. And Nixon took advantage of it and won. And of course, then we went into tremendous repression. And it was all in all not a happy time. We had some wild parties. Marijuana was all over the place. It was sexual revolution was in full blast. The pill was around. There were, from a lifestyle point of view, it was kind of exciting. But from a political and intellectual and just spiritual point of view, it was horrible. the place was falling apart.
So let me ask you that. I've been wanting to talk to somebody who lived through the times when, marijuana was so verboten, and now we're in a different world. What would
I can tell you exactly what happened. When I went into the Peace Corps, it was 1965. Lyndon Johnson was the president. He had just taken over from Jack Kennedy. No one smoked marijuana. Marijuana was considered, like heroin or something. No one knew what it was. Everybody wore button-down shirts and, ties and so on, blazers. They came back 2.5 years later, and all the men had beards and long hair. I went to a few parties, and all of my old friends are, hairy and smoking marijuana. And all the women are feeling quite liberated sexually. It was like Woody Allen's Sleeper, when they say goes in the future, and they say, what happened? They say a man named Albert Shanker got a hold of a nuclear device. Of course, many of you don't know who Albert Shanker was, but he was a powerful labor leader. It was the world turned upside down on its head. Music had changed. When I went away, I think the Beatles were just starting to be known in the United States. You had the Kingston Trio and, very clean button-down folk music. By the time I got back, the music was much more radical. And everything changed. People were very disaffected. And marijuana became quite widespread. I don't think it ever became not widespread, frankly. I mean, I think it achieved acceptance. It was illegal, but I don't think the New York police, if you were white, they didn't bother you. If you were black, they did bother you. And that's one of the underlying Black Lives Matter complaints. Lots of black men wound up incarcerated for very minor drug violations, and created a class of people with prison records. If you look at it objectively, and this has bothered me since the 70s, certainly, and the 60s, really, what advanced nation keeps 1/3 of an ethnic group in the justice system or in jail? Some are in prison, some are in jail. They haven't even had trials yet. It's a bizarre situation. I think historians are going to look back on it and think it was very strange. I mean, it's surprising, frankly, how unviolent the black population is, considering what's been done to them. Of course, you had people like Edgar Hoover and so on. They did their best to destroy black leadership in the late 60s. And another thing that's interesting with what's happening now is, in the late 60s, when they had the Kerner Commission, and, everyone's wondering why the blacks burning down the neighborhoods and so on. There were no blacks to speak of working in the media. There were no blacks in the police departments, very few. There were very few, if any, blacks in Congress. And there were no black governors. There were no black senators, except one Republican, Edward Brook. There were very few congressmen. The legislature had a few black people, but not a very large amount. When people talked about Hispanics, they just meant Puerto Ricans. There wasn't any immigration really till 65 of all of the other Latin Americans who came here. So when people began to complain about the bad treatment by police and authorities of black people in the late 60s, they were mainly black people complaining. Most white people didn't really get it. And the press didn't really tell the white people what was happening. And white people were not going into black neighborhoods. They didn't know. And even till now, I mean, again, historians are going to look back and wonder why most white people do not have any black friends in my generation. In my daughter's generation, that's not true anymore. I mean, she went to a much more integrated school. And I think, even younger people in their 20s are even more likely to have sort of interracial friendships. But white people in the late 60s had no idea really what was going on with black people. And frankly, black people had no idea what was going on with white people, except that they were meeting pretty nasty ones, wearing uniforms and so on. So now we have many black people, not enough, but many black people in positions of authority in local government, state government. So the response to the Black Lives Matter complaints is much more nuanced, much more interesting. You know, city councils, many big cities are run by black officials now, and city councils have majority of black officials, or at least a very large number of them. So they're responding much more aggressively to what's happened, to the look we've had at the way police treat black people.
I wanted to just show you the story. If you haven't seen it, it's fascinating. This is about Jaron Smith, who is the highest ranking African-American in the White House. There's obviously Ben Carson, but he's not in the White House. And this man wore a hoodie.
Not in the world, actually.
Yeah, he's in Egypt with the granaries inside the pyramids. But Mr. Smith once wore a hoodie in a demonstration on Capitol Hill protesting the death of Trayvon Martin.
Really?
Now President Trump calls him my star. And a fascinating, in-depth look at Jaron. He did not participate in the interview with the New York Times, but I learned so much from this, and it was just fascinating.
I'll have to read it.
Yeah.
Well, you know, there have always been black conservatives. I don't know if this guy's a conservative, but
no, he is. By the way, this was his point, and this is what Trump also says. He said he grew up in Cleveland with a mother who was addicted to drugs, and his father raised him, and he saw that Cleveland, run by Democrats, was in such bad shape. Therefore, he became a black Republican instead of one of the rare black Republicans at that time in Cleveland. And so that's what he's
there. I have to read it, but he's there because he's a Republican, not because he's a Trump lover, probably. And you know, they don't have a very large field to pick people from if they want to have some non-white faces in the White House. But just look at the pictures when Trump has these meetings, you know, and he invites the press in. Older white men. That's all they have.
That's right. Yeah.
Let's
keep going. Doug Levy. Sorry.
These are the guys who look like the guys who would fire you. These are, you know, it's so obvious what the problem is. He's completely cut off from reality.
He is. Doug Levy says, I'm under the redwood trees in Marin County, California, not quite upstate New York, but I'm okay here. Thanks for the interesting discussion.
Great. Are you under a tree now, I wonder?
I wonder.
Well, that's nice. I like the
Ashok Sharma has invited you to Kerala. Would like to have you here once the crisis is over. Ashok has been doing a great job of inviting everybody to Kerala. Really? I don't know if people are actually keeping track. Otherwise, you'll have a lot of guests if he's not careful.
Well, I'll talk to Sree. Maybe he can help me figure out how to get there. But I'm afraid it's going to take a while before we find a cure for this thing.
When do you predict you will get on an airplane again?
Not for a year. I mean, even if there's a vaccine, which it's not going to be given to the public until the middle or end of next year because they have to test it. You know, they have to test it on a lot of people. And they have to make sure that it's going to work efficiently, because if they use a defective vaccine, it's just going to play into the hands of anti-vaxxers and create an unwillingness to take the vaccine. People will be afraid of it.
And that's my worry, that even if there is a good vaccine, that Americans, 30% of them who've been poisoned, I mean, maybe more than that, poisoned by Trump, right, Jenny McCarthy, and of all people, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., right? Like,
well, he's a drug addict too, you know.
Sorry?
I mean, he had a substance abuse problem. He's got some interesting ideas. My wife used to be his babysitter, by the way.
No, are you serious? Tell us that story.
My wife worked for Bobby Kennedy in the Justice Department, and very involved with all sorts of exciting things like the search for Werner, Cheney, and Goodman, which was, the subject of Mississippi Burning, which I think was not accurate because it made the FBI look good. And she was on the Hoffa prosecution after Bobby was assassinated. Ethel was out at the, I forget what they called the estate. This is before I met my wife. My wife's a very good manager, very, very practical person. They asked her to go out there and sort of whip the household into shape, and the kids were all kids. And so Bobby Kennedy, when I met him at the J School once, he said, "Your wife was my babysitter." She stayed there for months, I think, until things calmed down. It was, it was a horrible shock. And they had a lot of little kids there. It was a very bad situation. So
and Bobby Kennedy Jr., Robert Kennedy Jr. has been good about the environment and cleaning up the river. And so do you have any theories about why he is like this about the vaccines?
It's a personality thing. I don't know, other than to have met him once. Maybe he's a rigid person. I don't know. Does he have autistic children? Some people with autistic kids have taken that position. I don't know,
That's okay. Let's keep going. Doug Levy says, "I remember Odessa, the restaurant that's closed down in San Francisco. He remembers the New York restaurant." And Rose says, "I know Odessa too, and that's closed down now."
I wish I had gone there. They probably had good borscht shav, which is a potato soup. And I used to go on the Lower East Side to Sammy's Romanian restaurant, which was good because both of my grandmothers came from what was then Romania. And so I grew up eating their Romanian Jewish food. It's quite tasty. Sammy's was sort of good. It was a little greasy. Not as good as my grandmother's knishes were much better. Believe me, they weren't greasy.
Mark says the amount of restaurants and other small businesses that are going bankrupt and are getting to ridiculous rates around the country. Yes. Can you talk for a minute about being, your family was Jewish, and what it was like now to see that being Jewish is, we had a friend of ours, Linda Bernstein, saying that it's been interesting for her to be in America that now, she's considered as somebody who is white when Jewish people were not considered white for a long time. Can you talk about that? Because not everybody understands that history.
Yeah, when I grew up, my father, I remember once we were driving around in New Jersey where I grew up in a rural area. And he drove through some communities. He said, Jews can't live here. And then he explained to me how, Jews couldn't get jobs in certain places. This was true when I was a kid. When I went to high school, in my community, in the cooperative community, there were mainly Jews who were also farmers. And I didn't know till I got to high school the Jews were not in the majority. That's how sheltered I was. But when I got to high school...
Wait, you thought Jews were the majority community? Because that's who you knew.
That's all I knew. We were stuck there in this little rural cooperative. I was very nice to the few non-Jews who were there. Very nice. We got to high school, which was like a central school. And the girls thought we were very exotic. It was terrific. The boys all tried to beat us up. They hated it. That was very anti-Semitic in that high school. We had to say the New Testament was the Bible that was used in the classroom. At that time, you had to say prayers in school. You had to say the Lord's Prayer to eat in the cafeteria. It was very traditional, backward almost.
Wait, one second, in a public school?
Yes. They had to say prayers.
Why? Well, I thought the separation of...
It came later.
Came later. How old are you?
I'm 29 years old. I'm 78. I was born in 1941. You certainly are a probing questioner.
Yes. No, because I was serious. So this is how little I understand of this then.
The town, Hightstown, was segregated. It was in central New Jersey. Exit 8, if there are any New Jerseyans listening. Everything was segregated. The barbershops, the bars, the movie theater. Blacks sat on the left, whites on the right. The people from my little cooperative, Roseville, we sat on the left just to show what self-righteous snobs we were. We sat on the black side. But there were no blacks in our community. Absolute segregation. The blacks, we used to have a dance on top of the firehouse every Saturday night. It was called Teen Canteen. So some of the black students said, we'd like to come to the teen, we want to have a dance too. So they started a teen canteen on Friday nights for them. They wouldn't allow the blacks and the whites to be together in the same dance where they were dancing together. There was one person from our cooperative used to go out with a black guy in high school. It was so odd. It was such a scandal. There was just one case of a mixed couple. Even when I got to college, it was very rare to see black people in the college. It was at Rutgers, the state university. You'd think there would be a lot of black, there weren't that many black people. It was, this was in the late 50s, early 60s. It was like the South almost. That's why, I think a lot of black people say they feel better in the South because at least the people are out front about it. Anyway, getting back to the Jewish thing, I've never gotten rid of the feeling that I'm in a minority here. This may be what Linda was saying. I don't know how old she is. I'm always aware if I'm the only Jewish person around in a group. Although it doesn't affect me. I think like I'm in the majority. It's odd, right? Maybe because of the way I grew up. I don't have, when we went to the high school, there were some Jewish families in the town of Heightstown, and their fathers had like little clothing stores and, the things that Jewish businessmen had when they were in the minority. Those people they were like bent over the kids. They were like whipped curs, The Jewish kids from my town, we were all Jewish. We were kind of proud. We were in the majority. We were in majority types. So I've never felt afraid, but I have been cognizant of what happened in Nazi Germany, and they had the Ku Klux Klan in Heightstown. I've been aware of things that could happen. I think that the younger Jewish people who grow up aren't aware of that anymore. Hence, you have these. I'm not going to say that they're like Stephen Miller, who's there's something wrong with him. But a lot of young Jewish Republicans, they don't understand how recently Jews were not able to get into many institutions. When I was dodging the draft, I took the Foreign Service exam. That was going to be 2 years, and I aced it. And then I had the interview, and I passed the interview. I didn't get in. I flunked the background check. To some degree, it may have been because I was Jewish. At that time, in the State Department, the Foreign Service, there were virtually no Jews, maybe a handful. Now you see a lot of Jewish ambassadors. The White House is sort of like an offshoot of the Israeli embassy. It's ridiculous. There's been a whole change of view. And I just hope that we don't have a wave of anti-Semitism, because there are going to be a lot of very shocked people if that happens. I have a Greek friend here who says to me, I said, I haven't seen much anti-Semitism around here. He says, yeah, because they don't say it in front of you. He says, there's a huge amount up here. So it's become unfashionable. That's why we don't know about it. Ever since the Nazis did one good thing, they made it unfashionable to be an anti-Semite. So the anti-Semites had to go back under the rocks. Although Trump has lifted the rocks, and they are coming out. And when I covered the Oklahoma bombing, I went out to Arizona to see the way that McVeigh had lived. He had lived in Kingman, Arizona, which was an isolated area, so right-wing, it's like a militia area. The conservation officers for the state conservation department had to wear bulletproof vests because if they ventured out into the hinterland, people would shoot at them. And that's where McVeigh got a lot of his attitudes. And I fell in with these people. I was very curious. And I learned, there's like the theories that these people have, which, for instance, they think that there's an international banking conspiracy that created the Federal Reserve, and that's the way the United States is controlled. If you listen to Rand Paul and his father talk about the Federal Reserve, this is what they call dog whistles. When you hear people complaining about the Federal Reserve, you know where they're coming from. These are the people that have come out from under the rock with Trump. They just know from a public relations point of view that they're not supposed to say anything about Jews. But they do. They don't like Jews. And Stephen Miller and his ilk are a bunch of deluded idiots. They're like useful idiots.
Or useless.
Useless.
Yeah.
Right?
Let's keep going. It's, we could just go on for many hours, but let's go through these comments. Rahajan says the first tour of a newspaper was at Newsday's Melville offices in 1979 or 1980. Rahajan went on to work at the New York Times for many years. And the mutual love and respect for each other is very evident. Thank you, Rahajan. He's talking about the two of us, which is very true. Which is very sweet. Saswati says, really love today's show, Waiting for Better Days, and she's watching from Delhi, India. And Mariana Martinez Estens, you remember her? Yes, glad to this conversation between two great teachers. Love you both. Thank you so much.
How are you? I miss you. I see you on Facebook sometimes, and you look terrific.
Janet says, we're all experiencing technical difficulty these days. That sounds about right. Yes. And Terry Ann Thompson, you remember her? Our colleague. I think we all started the same year as teachers.
What's she doing in Las Vegas?
She retired to Las Vegas, and she
retired. I hope you're lucky.
Our friend Neil Parks, watching from Springfield, Virginia, and he's the executive producer of the New York Times Read Along. Josh, what do you make of me reading the New York Times print newspaper out loud for 5 years?
You're like Fiorello LaGuardia. You read the comics.
That's what I heard. That's what I heard. I don't listen to it. I have to apologize. But maybe I should, because I just look at the Times online. We only get the earliest edition up here, and it comes late in the day. So you don't get any print publications?
No, because we're so isolated here. There's one, the Times Union, which used to be a bigger newspaper, and it's a Hearst paper in Albany, which is sort of like a shadow of itself. They have very few reporters. They don't do very in-depth reporting. It's not their fault, they don't have the resources.
Carl Webb says, hello from Austin, Texas. Have you been?
Yeah, I love Austin. Very nice.
It's great. Our friend, our former student, Sherpa, says, she says, happy to hear you both watching from UAE. How nice.
What are you doing in the UAE? That's interesting. Well, I follow Sherpa on Facebook, and I've seen her. She has 2 kids, I think. And one of my only regrets about my stay at the J School was I wanted to bring a lot of people from Bhutan as students, and Sherpa was sort of a pioneer for me. I don't know if you recall, but we accepted 2 or 3 or 4 people, which from a per capita point of view was
incredibly high. Incredibly high.
But David Claytel, the late David Claytel, may his soul rest in peace, for some reason thought I was crazy to want to bring people from Bhutan. But I thought this could be great. They're just emerging into the larger world. They've been protected by their rulers, and we could have a fantastic impact and create a fantastic level of journalism there. It would be would have been revolutionary.
Yeah, I believe at one point 4 out of the 10 journalists who were English language journalists in Bhutan were trained by Columbia Journalism School.
Yeah.
So that was
They were
in
the
part
veterans.
thanks to you. And I spent from the age of about 10 months to the age of about 3 years, I spent in Bhutan as a little kid. And Terry says hello to you, and Janice says maintain positivity even though times of challenge. Glad to hear Josh again, says Janice. And Mark says, would love to hear about that picture behind Josh. I knew somebody would ask about it. We talked about it earlier. Tell them about that.
And I were on vacation in Maine, and I'm going to cut my chin off. You see it? Okay.
Yeah, we see it.
We saw this at a gallery. A fashion photographer, a French fashion photographer, used to go to Brittany to stay at a farm in the summers, and she photographed this family over years. We have another one here. Let me see if I can show you. Can you see that?
Yes.
That's a family taking a lunch while working in the fields. And it just seemed like a fabulous picture. It captured us, my wife and I. We couldn't decide between the two, so we bought both of them.
Nice.
And,
what is that? What is behind you? What is that on that beam behind you? There's like a string or a rope coming down. What is that right behind you?
A wire from a light.
Oh,
that mask I got that in Nepal.
nice.
If you look at it closer, it scares the hell out of my granddaughters, unfortunately. But it's supposed to protect the house.
Yeah.
That's what my daughter was in Nepal in the Peace Corps. I went to visit her and also for the CPJ.
Sky says, my grandfather used to take corduroy roads up to where you are.
Wow, Sky must be old.
Mark says, thanks for doing great audio histories. In New York and North Carolina Folklore Association does similar work. Rose says, so great to hear Josh Friedman and his perspective of Sree as a student. And my dad, who's watching from Kerala, says, your guest looks like Field Marshal Manekshaw. This is one of India's greatest battlefield heroes.
Really?
He was so he says he looked like, yeah, that's a compliment.
I left my stick. What are those sticks that they carry?
Yes, that's right. Those baton type things. Yes. Mark says, Josh, did you ever meet George Reedy, one of my professors from Marquette, who was LBJ's press secretary?
No, I remember George Reedy as a press secretary. He was very down home, kind of a relaxed guy who had a tough job because Johnson used to say things that had to be rescued. And I also remember he had bad feet. That became a huge news story.
Terry says, wasn't our dean Tom Goldstein also class of 68?
No, Tom was in the class, I think, of 67.
Right.
Although I became friends with Tom well before I went to Columbia. We were, when he was working for Ed Koch.
And talk about the Pulitzer Prize you won. Rose is pointing out, our producer is pointing out that you won it for international reporting.
Well, it was a team in a sense, but I just have to say that each of us was listed individually. So I feel that's why I can say I won that Pulitzer, because some people who are a group, they were in a group. I know this sounds sort of self-centered, but some people wouldn't.
You're saying that as you're trying to center yourself in the frame. So self-centering is okay.
What am I supposed to do here?
Yeah, that's good. Right there, right there.
If they win a group thing, sometimes the whole newspaper wins it.
That's right.
And then they say, well, I want a Pulitzer, but I'm going to be very vain and tell you that they had our names are listed. So there were 3 of us. I went with a wonderful photographer named Ozir Muhammad.
Yes.
You may know. Do you know him, Sree?
Yes, very well. Yeah.
Went to the Times. Ozir came from what could be considered sort of aristocracy. His grandfather was Elijah Muhammad.
Wow.
And I remember a scene in Mali when we had gone to Africa. We were sent, as I said, the paper had a lot of money. They sent us to cover desertification in the Sahel region of Africa, a story no one was going to read. I mean, Ozir was listed before Dennis. I don't know why they listed it that way. But they had all these, the publisher would have like these vanity projects. Like everything in journalism, it just turned out to be a very lucky break, a morbidly lucky break, that we arrived in the Sahel region of Africa, which goes from West Africa over toward Ethiopia. And the year that they had that horrible famine. So what was an obscure story turned into the world story. It was like, people from all over the world. And since we had prepared, I did a huge amount of research. And I went over to the UN and got a lot of letters of introduction. And Ethiopia was a very closed society then. It was run by a Stalinist type government, the Derg. And they weren't letting anyone in because they were keeping the famine a secret. But when we were there in Ivory Coast or Mali, the secret came out. And suddenly they were welcoming journalists. But we were the first newspaper journalists to go there, because the Derg Stalinist government was such a bureaucratic nightmare. It took weeks, if not months, to get press credentials, press permits. So we got there and no one else was there. And since Newsday had so much money, I rented a DC-3 without even checking back at the newspaper, which created a certain amount of concern later on. And we just worked. I mean, we knocked it out of the park. It was, you have to be lucky to win one of these Pulitzers. There are a lot of very good reporters, but then when the opportunity presents itself, you have to really work hard. So all of the elements were present, and it worked out. It was a stunning experience, and I didn't realize till later on when I was at the J School and I sat on a few. I guess they're called juries. I forget.
Yeah, Pulitzer juries. Yeah.
Yeah. How extraordinary the consideration is of the entries. It made me feel better. At the time we got it, I thought, maybe Dave Leventhal, who was the publisher, and made a deal. But no, it was on the merits. I feel very good about it. It was all of my experience as a journalist came into play. It was like being one of these first responders with the COVID. I mean, you're there and you just have to do it.
And we want to remind people that this was in the mid '80s, and it looks like you beat out the New York Times team that covered the assassination of Indira Gandhi. So that was another big story. And typically, the Pulitzers and other prizes focus on kind of breaking news kind of stories. So the fact that you were able to put them on that big a story was fascinating. I want to ask you go ahead.
A lot of the credit goes to Osier, because what we did was we matched the content of the writing with the pictures. Like if I would find someone interesting that I was speaking to in a camp or whatever, I would say, Osier, this is the person I spoke to, and I said such and such, and he would come over and photograph that person. Or if he said, I just photographed a really interesting person, come on over, I would go and interview the person. So I think what was happening was, in newspapers at that point, pre-web, the photographers and the writers didn't collaborate very much. It was sort of disorienting, because you would be reading about someone in the story and pictures would be of someone else. It was kind of confusing. People were watching TV. They were used to seeing the person they were learning about talking. So by harmonizing it, I think it created a kind of a subliminal or nuanced theme or feeling for the people who read it and saw it. And it worked. I was very happy with it. although I got sick in Ethiopia, Ozir took me to the hospital in Nairobi, and they made me go back after I got out of the hospital. And it was great. I have a very affectionate feeling for Ethiopia.
I just want to point out that Ethiopia is not the only country where you've spent time. There is, in the country of Georgia, there's a Joshua Friedman Prize, and
Yes.
my Georgian is a little rusty, but I was able to find this.
This is interesting. Georgia is it's like an island in a sea of kind of strange countries. You know, to the north are the Caucasus, the Chechnya type countries, and Armenia is next to it. Armenia's got a lot of problems. Azerbaijan is one of the most hostile to journalists in the world. Iran is to the south. Turkey, another very anti-journalist atmosphere. For some reason, and I'll tell you the reason. There are two reasons. The underlying reason is that the Georgians are actually a very civilized group of people. They're Christians in a sea of Muslims to a great degree. They feel, they've always felt kind of special, like the Ethiopians. They grew up in valleys. There are many tribes, many dialects, and they feel special about themselves. And I think they respect education. The other thing is, a graduate of the Columbia Journalism School, Margie, I can't remember her last name, went to Georgia years before I went there as part of the International Federation of, it's a Knight-sponsored thing, IFCJ, I think it's called. IFG says, it's in Washington. It's like a Peace Corps for journalists. She spent a year and she helped start a journalism school modeled on the Columbia Journalism School, which, as most of the people listening know, is pretty unique in its hands-on approach versus theoretical stuff. And through a set of circumstances, I was invited to go there to Chipa, it's called, and give some talks and so on. And we fell in love with each other. And they named the prize after me, which was a shocker. Usually you have to put up money to have a prize named after you. But they put up the money, and the Dutch Foreign Ministry and European Journalism Center. And I go there every year. I obviously can't go there this year. And it's interestingly, had a very encouraging impact. You know, if you give these prizes, it's like the impact that Pulitzer has. It's really elevated the level of investigative journalism, and people are proud to get a prize. So I feel very good about it. The journalism there is pretty good.
Let's go quickly through some of these questions. So many questions and comments here. Did Friedman grow up in New Jersey in farm country, and what kind of commune were you in?
It was a cooperative. It's now called Roosevelt, New Jersey, named after FDR. It was started in the 30s by Albert Einstein and Eleanor Roosevelt, and a guy named Benjamin Brown, a visionary Jewish European immigrant who set up co-ops out west and decided finally he would work with his own people. They got money from the federal government under the New Deal. It was money that was used to start greenbelt communities and money for farm communities and so on. The idea was to have a farm, various farms, dairy, poultry, vegetables, a factory, because most of the people coming were immigrant Jews who were working in the garment industry in New York or Philadelphia. And the store was called the commissary, and everybody helped build their houses. They were designed in the Bauhaus style. The assistant architect was Louis Kahn, who later went on to be very famous. And it was an idyllic place to grow up. Unfortunately, the co-op failed after a few years because the people couldn't agree on things, which is common in co-ops. But the spirit lived on, and a lot of artists and writers came there. My father was brought there because he had studied agriculture at Cornell, and he was supposed to be helping them with the farms when he graduated. But the thing went out of business, that part. So he wound up working for the town a little bit, and then he started commuting to New York. But I grew up with a very varied group of people that were every political stripe, the Marxists, Stalinists, Trotskyists, socialists, they all hated each other. My parents were considered right-wingers because they were trim and Democrats. And they supported Adlai Stevenson. They ran the Stevenson campaign. That was very right-wing. I don't think there was a Republican in the town. But it was wonderful. We hung out in the woods. It was a lovely way to grow up. Just a group. My cohort was about 20 people. And it was small. The school was small. And we just grew up hanging around in nature. And each house had a big yard with gardens and stuff. I loved it. And I have, the places I have loved living in my life have been little villages. One in the Peace Corps, up in the mountains in Costa Rica, in a very remote area. Now there's Rensselaerville, which is in the hills, the foothills of the Catskills, overlooking the Hudson Valley. There's something about a village that brings out both positive things in people and also very petty negative things. But in a village, you know everybody and everybody knows you, and you're connected.
Why do you think, Firoz asks, why do you think even educated people get trapped into politicians' BS and get divided based on religion, race, etc.?
Because we're tribal. Basically we're tribal people. And, especially in the United States where the immigrants came from tribal areas. Look, the Sicilians came, very tribal area. The Jews from Eastern Europe, tribal, down to the little village, and the same with the Italian immigrants. They would have we learned this, Sree, when we took the international students on a tour of the Lower East Side in Little Italy, which hardly exists anymore. The people used to live on a certain street depending on whether they were from Naples or from Genoa or from Sicily. They divided up that way. And the nature of tribal living is that you distrust the other. The other is the enemy. So even though many of us, we're third or fourth generation or more, I think, some of this stuff stuck with us. And, if we're tickled in the right way and made to feel insecure enough, we revert sometimes. And that's what happens. Trump is very good at making people feel frightened. The enemy is on the doorstep. And he's played it very cleverly until the divine intervention of the COVID-19. Thank you.
Mark says, I could listen to these stories all night long. Great stories he is sharing. But I don't think we want to be here all night long. What time do you go to bed? What time do you go to bed?
Once you get me started, I don't shut up. You remember that.
Eileen says, so good to see Josh Friedman here. And
Eileen, hi.
Yeah.
Eileen, I love Eileen.
Yeah.
Eileen is a phenomenal foreign correspondent who lives in Florida now. And I saw her, and she was one of the students I really loved my first year there. And I saw her in Jerusalem when she lived there. She showed me all around her shtetl. I went to a Shabbos dinner, Sabbath dinner with her at her friend's house. And it was very Hamisha, which is, these are Yiddish words that I picked up from my grandparents. Hamisha means kind of home-like.
Home. Mark says, I've been reading Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee. Some of these same lessons are being taught by the government even back then.
Oh, the way we treated the Indians, Native Americans. It's just, I watched Stagecoach. One of the guys on our advisory board, Sam Pollard, the Logan board, said he thought the best movie ever made was Stagecoach. Sam is an African American. He said there are some things in there that are going to bother you. It was made by John Ford. It was John Wayne's first feature film, basically, as a young actor. And it's a fantastically made film. But of course, they're shooting the hell out of the Indians. You know, it's on John Wayne with one rifle. Presumably, he has a clip of, I don't know, 6 or a dozen cartridges. He's shooting like 3 dozen Indians, and they're falling off their horses. It's terrible the way they're portrayed.
This is that movie that you mentioned. What do you think of what's happening with the removal of John Wayne's name from things? There's a big movement to continue that in California. They're doing that. And where are you on? You may have seen there's a petition that's been written asking to remove Thomas Jefferson's statue by alumni. Alumni at Columbia Journalism School have asked for that statue to be taken down.
Well, you know, I'm an older person, and I don't feel that comfortable with a lot of this stuff. You know, I don't know who the hell it is that they tore down Frederick Douglass's statue in Rochester, and some abolitionists out in San Francisco. I don't know who starts these things. I could see the Confederates. It's disgusting that they have those Confederate statues, and that stuff was all done in the late 19th century and early 20th century, when the Klan was really suppressing Black people, and you know, it was horrible. Jim Crow and all that. Those things all should go. But I don't know, Jefferson. It's hard for me to imagine that. It's you know, I can understand Black people feeling very uncomfortable with Confederate statues. It's the way I would feel if I saw a statue of some Nazi guy, you know, or a raving anti-Semite. You know, I would want them all gone. But at some point, there has to be temperance of it. I mean, you know, maybe I sound like an old fogey. I don't know, but you know, Jefferson did some good things too. He wrote the Constitution. The Constitution is a good document. For those who haven't read it, they should read it. You know, he had many defects, and one of which was having slaves and raping female slaves, and children, young, you know, underage female slaves. I think the statue thing has to be done in a more institutional way than having crowds tear them down. I mean, I think that if Trump were any kind of a sentient being, there would be a movement to establish an institutional method of making judgments. Then it would be done in a civilized way. And if they remove all the statues, so be it. You know, it would have been done it would be like in India if they tore down statues of Muslims. I mean, you know, that I could.
You mean the Mughal emperors? You're talking about that?
Yeah. No, I mean, it's you have to have. It has to be done in the right way. You can't just have I don't want to use the word mob because Trump uses it, and I don't know who the instigators are of some of these things. You know, the Russians are very eager to get everyone all screwed up, and so is Trump. The Boogaloo, you know, the Justice Department keeps talking about Antifa, but if you look at the people that they've arrested, most of them are either nutty people or belong to the Boogaloo movement, which is, you know, fanatic right-wing racist white supremacy group. So I just wish it were being done in a more organized way, so that you know, I'd like to see Gates and Black intellectuals that I respect who are familiar with history be put in a position where they could make judgments rather than just some people throw a rope on a statue.
And you were talking about Henry Louis Gates, also known as Skip Gates, a famous Harvard professor, who in one of the more surreal moments of the Obama presidency was involved in a situation where somebody called the cops because he was locked out of his own home.
He was trying to get into his house.
And fortunately, this was in Cambridge, I gather, and so there were no bullets fired, or he was not shot or anything. But he and that police officer ended up having beer at the White House with Obama, and that was a lifetime ago.
Yeah.
And here we are today with everything that's happening. Josh, we've got to stop now. It's already 11 o'clock. We started it.
Oh my God. Gee, don't you have any discipline? What about all that stuff I taught you? We've been going for 2 hours.
That's because you took a saunter away from the studio for I don't know for how long. You decided to walk away.
It happened to me. For Trump, it happened to me.
It was the Trump administration cutting you off.
Yeah,
right there. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. So on a serious note, we've got to let you go. And by the way, Rusudan says, I met you in 2009. Hello, Mr. Friedman.
Yes,
Rusudan.
How are you? Nice to see you again.
Yeah. So here's what I'd like you to do. I'd like you to talk to young journalists. Do you still recommend journalism as a career? What are the things that you've learned in your life as a journalist that you think are still relevant, still matter in today's world? And then we will stop and let you go.
It's hard to, the thing is about journalism, it's an affliction. It's like an addiction. And you can't, people who decide to be journalists really, you can't just decide to be a journalist. It's something that's sort of inside of you and you can't help it. So unfortunately now the market model is collapsed. So if you become a journalist now, you're going to have trouble supporting a family. And I would not urge anyone to do that without really thinking it out thoroughly. I think it has to be that in the long run, there will be something will develop that will allow serious journalists to live, to support themselves as journalists. I don't know whether, it could be what happened with radio where you have subscription models on FM. It could be narrow casting of FM stations like, that aim for just certain audiences. Obviously, the consumers will have to put up money in some way. The advertising model isn't working. If you have the affliction, I can't tell you not to do it because you have the affliction. And it's really scary now that there aren't as many journalists as there used to be. And the democracy needs it. So you'd be like a first responder to do it. But it's going to be very hard, very, very rough compared to the easy life I had. Working for well-funded institutions. That's my advice. Take that with a grain of salt.
Let's look at some of these comments. Sherpin says, this is great. Jonathan says, wonderful stories, great raconteur. Thank you. And Rose says, this is almost as long as our 100th edition that went for 2.5 hours. And Sherpin said she enjoyed the international class. And Roberta Oster is watching from Richmond, Virginia. And Josh, I just want to say on the record in front of everybody, thank you for 25 years of teaching me so many different things and from being an awesome colleague, first awesome teacher, awesome colleague, and somebody who inspired so many people around the world. And I saw that firsthand, what you did for so many people, including me, and I'll never forget. And I'm using this pandemic as a chance to just check in with my friends and my mentors. And that's what I'm doing here. And I'm just super grateful to you for giving us 2 hours. I know you didn't mean to give us 2 hours, but you did.
Hey, look, my calendar's not that full these days. Where am I going to go? Anyway, Sree, I'm very proud of you too. I mean, really proud that you've done so well. And keep it up, man. We need you.
Thank you. And our friends, our guest has been Josh Friedman. We're going to let it go, and then we're going to do a couple of housekeeping things, including telling you about an awesome show we have tomorrow at noon that you won't want to miss. So let's let Josh go. And thank you, Josh. Good night.
Thank you, Sree. Good night to all my friends who sent messages. I think about you often.
Thanks. And Josh is amazing. But I want to tell you about our show tomorrow. And then we also want to do what we do every night, which is to say their names. And I'm going to show you here our show for tomorrow. I Fund Women. Karen Kahan will be with us. She's the CEO and founder of I Fund Women, a marketplace for women-owned businesses and the people who want to fund them. This is part of our continuing conversation, episode 124. That means episode 125 in 125 days is on Tuesday at 9 p.m. How will we celebrate it? What will we do? What should we do? You tell us. Email me, please, sree@sree.net, sree@sree.net. I want your ideas on how we should mark episode 125. It's hard to even imagine that we have been doing this and doing it nonstop without a break for 4+ months now. I have been, one of the things that we did do on the show after talking to Kimberly Crenshaw, the Columbia professor who coined the term intersectionality, is to say her name and to say their name. She told us to do that. So we've been saying their names in different ways. For several weeks, we were saying their names by reading the names from a Time magazine cover where they listed names of people who had been killed. And if you haven't seen this photograph before, on the left is a cover of Time magazine by Titus Kaffir, and on the right is a picture of a young George Floyd with his mother, Larcinia Floyd. Larcinia would die 2 years, almost to the day before her son George would be killed. And they're buried now together in Houston. He died in Minneapolis, as you know. But over the last few days, we also decided to do something a little different, inspired by Kimberly Crenshaw and her suggestion that we say her name. And I'm going to do that now. I'm going to read the names from the Wikipedia report of Say Her Name, the Say Her Name report. And I'm going to say these names. And we do this every single day as we try to make sense of what is happening around this country. Breonna Taylor, Tatiana Jefferson, Charlena Siobhan Lyles, Corinne Gaines, India Kager, Sandra Bland, Alexia Christian, Maya Hall, Megan Hockaday, Janisha Fonville, Natasha McKenna, Tanisha Anderson, Aura Rosser, Shanique Proctor, Michelle Cousseau, Pearlie Golden, Gabriela Navarez, Yvette Smith, Renisha McBride, Miriam Carey, Chaim Livingston, Kayla Moore, Shelley Frey, Melissa Williams, Shulina Weldon, Alicia Thomas, Chantel Davis, Charmel Edwards, Rekia Boyd, Cherise Francis, Ayana Stanley Jones, Tarika Wilson, Catherine Johnston, Alberta Spruill, Kendra James, Latanya Haggerty, Margaret Laverne Mitchell, Taisha Miller, Danette Daniels, Frankie Ann Perkins, Sanji Taylor, and Eleanor Bumpers. Such a hard thing to imagine all those people. Each one is a story. Each one is a name worth saying and a name worth remembering. If you have suggestions for guests on the show, people we should talk to, we would be very grateful if you would write to me at sree@sree.net, sree@sree.net. We are always looking for ideas, theme suggestions, topics to cover. And as you've heard, we've had more than 75. We've had now 125 shows tomorrow. And in our first 100 shows, we had 201 guests. 45 cities and 12 countries were represented in those guests. And we've had more than 1 million viewers of our shows cumulatively. And we want to continue to do this. Please tell us your suggestions by emailing me, sree@sree.net. We want to thank our sponsors for making it possible to be here with you every single day. We want to thank Muckrack Academy for the free Fundamentals of Social Media course, free certification in Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram. And you just sign up at mrac.co/social, mrac.co/social. More than 4,000 people have already signed up. And we want to remind you that this Thursday, we're hosting Dr. Little Steven's Roadshow. Join Stevie Van Zandt and guests in a dynamic exchange to support TeachRock's free curriculum, teachrock.org/roadshow. Guests include Kanya Das, Kid Leo, Michael Stanley, and Neil Giraldo. You've got to join us. It'll be awesome. Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern, teachrock.org/roadshow. It's one of the many shows that my team at Digimentors puts together and does for the world, all around the world. If you'd like a show or a virtual event that you need to put on the air, please talk to us and we will help you. We keep saying, don't postpone that conference, don't cancel it, don't even plan it without talking to me first and my incredible team, Sree at Sree.net. Thanks very much, everybody. We'll see you tomorrow for the episode on I Fund Women, which is at noon Eastern, a different time, noon Eastern tomorrow. Thanks very much, everybody. We'll see you soon. Bye.